As Jean said, we were collecting pain point questions yesterday on the pinboard, and those were collected on an ongoing basis. And in the early hours of this morning, I then reviewed those to sadly not maybe address all of them this morning, but select the ones that most represented the bulk of the questions and also relate to some of the key topics that we're exploring here at the conference, both yesterday and today. And I think probably it would be fair to say that those three popular areas relate to risk-based monitoring, feasibility, and challenges with regards to recruitment. So, again, without further ado, let's dive into the questions. So, this is a risk-based monitoring focused question. Will reduced monitoring frequency affect patient recruitment and data quality adversely? I don't know who'd like to kick that one off.
I'll give that one a go. I think that we currently at Amgen have over 50% of our study portfolio in the risk-based monitoring model. And so far, we haven't done a double-blind trial. It's very difficult to compare, even if you tried to take different sites and within a study take some that were traditional and some risk-based monitoring. But we've not had any major concerns. I think when we introduced the model over 2 years ago, there were a lot of concerns, but those have tended to decrease. The model is flexible, and you can add monitoring visits, but we try and reduce those for recruitment boosting activities because it drives up your costs quite quickly. So our experience has been generally this isn't the disaster that people predicted it would be when we first started. I think on the quality side, that is an extremely interesting question. And there was a debate yesterday at the risk-based monitoring panel, and I'm not sure that we've yet got this right as an industry. My personal feeling is that we have to show to ourselves, and I think eventually to regulators, that the new risk-based monitoring model produces as good or better quality than the old model of 100% source document verification, 4 weekly monitoring visits, etc. And whatever your new model is, triggered monitoring visits, reduced SDV, centralized monitoring, remote monitoring, whatever you use. Is it better? We've taken a look at what did we miss? We all know we miss stuff. Jeffrey here, I'm sure, as an auditor, goes in and finds after 100% source document verification, 4 weekly monitoring, there's still adverse events that are missed, concomitant medications that are missed, other things, you know the list. The regulatory authorities regularly find this despite 100% source document verification. So the question is, how much less or more do we miss with the reduced SDV triggered monitoring? And we've tried to compare this and gone back and looked at studies where we've done 100% source document verification, or I should say we've looked at patient cases and looked at those, and then we've looked in our new model. What did we miss? What did the monitor miss when they first did the monitoring trip? And it's worked its way through the various systems. And we see that there were less than 1% important errors in both models, but that the risk-based monitoring model actually was slightly less. I mean, it's tough. There's no statistics here, but it did not appear to us that the risk-based monitoring model missed more than the 100% traditional model. So I think it's important for others in the industry to also look at this and find out how do these numbers compare? Because it is a numbers game. We've got to prove to ourselves. We can't say, well, I think it sort of seems okay. We've got to actually look at the numbers. So I think that from my perspective, the quality is as good or maybe better. We're focusing, the model in the new one focuses on sites that are struggling with the protocol. There's site staff are struggling with it rather than in the old model smearing the resource across everybody. Yes. And having the CRA try to check everything from sites perhaps that are doing a really good job and don't need that checking. So it's focusing where the checks are needed.
Okay. I mean, it's almost feeds into the generally accepted sort of misnomer that we talk about risk-based monitoring, but it's not actually risk-based, it's risk avoidance, and it's having that information to more accurately redirect resources in problem areas.
Or perhaps more accurately, it's thoughtful monitoring.
Right.
You know, as you say, you know, blindly going in and checking everything, or do you actually think about what you need to check?
And
you
which
know,
sites need to be-
which sites, when you're on the site. I mean, yes, as auditors, we do go through and we will check one or two patients and for total verification of accuracy. But a lot of that is biased towards the verification of the existence of the data. Is it robust? Will it withstand inspection? Will it withstand scrutiny? And that sometimes you get the monitors just accepting the fact that it's written down on a piece of paper somewhere means it's taken as the law.
Yep.
Whereas in fact, very often you find there's all sorts of other places where you need to look. And just because you come to the fact at the first point, you don't go beyond that and verify that it is actually accurate. And so hopefully, you know, with an approach that gives you a bit more time for thinking, then, you know, maybe it is perhaps leverage and will be better in the future. And it gives the CRAs a lot more interesting things to do than just going down the list and spending hours checking things.
They become a detective.
More, yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Geoff, you mentioned the word time, which actually leads into one of the other questions that was posted. How do we drive more timely data entry in the ECRF world to ensure we have real-time data to inform and enable the risk-based monitoring model? Because obviously if we're looking at effectively more data-driven decision-making, you clearly need to have that data to make those decisions. So collectively, how do you feel that we might drive more timely, or even, let's call it, faster entry of data into the various systems we used? I don't know if you want to take that one.
I'll start, but I know Adrian has some good news on this from his perspective. So timely data entry is extremely important, as people know. I don't think that's new news. I think it all begins with us putting the request in our contract with our investigator sites. But I think what's more important is, as you begin to develop the relationship with the clinical site, the reminder to the investigator and study coordinator about the importance of early entry, both for themselves and for the data that we're collecting. The speedier the entry, the better recall they'll have of the patient visit, and the sooner that we'll begin the cleaning process. And as everyone knows, the cleaning process now begins the minute data begins to be entered. So I think the timeliness of that entry is becoming more and more important. And if we can get our investigators and our clinical coordinators to believe and understand the value that both we and them will get out of the early entry, I think that's a nice beginning. Unfortunately, we still see some laggers, but I think we're beginning to make some progress there. But I know you've made great progress.
Yeah, I agree completely with your points. Just one more in terms of risk-based monitoring, where the monitor is going less frequently to the site. It is absolutely critical that we get early data entry so that we can have the EDC systems do its check, we can get the data to data management quickly and do those level 1 checks very quickly. We've put in a second level of checks with a medical pharmacist group that reviews the data very quickly using tools like Spotfire to identify individual anomalies. And then we have a third level, which is the therapeutic area level review, MD review. To get that done quickly, it starts with getting in the data very quickly. So luckily, we started about 5 years ago. And in fact, the most complex part of this is actually getting the data to know where you are. So the talking between the various systems, particularly IVRS and the EDC system and your database system, is quite complex to give you the information to feed back to our CRAs, our investigators, as to where they are with the speed of data entry. How old is their data? And we were pretty shocked a few years ago to find there was a long tail of data that wasn't getting entered until 90 days or more. And it was a shock to our CRAs, our sites, and ourselves that there was such a tail of data outstanding for so long. As Patrick said, we've changed things like the contract, but probably the biggest tool was just understanding and being able to say to a site, you've got outstanding data that hasn't been entered for 2 months. And there's been a remarkable turnaround. I've been shocked, and we're now at nearly 90% of our data is entered within 5 days, and a tiny, tiny fraction that sticks out for longer than that. So I was a skeptic two and a half years ago when we started pushing this, but it's had pretty dramatic results, and it's absolutely essential if you're doing remote risk-based monitoring, or whatever we want to call it.
I agree.
Adrian, just a quick corollary question to that. Have you seen a correlation between the sites that historically and repeatedly enter data late and the overall quality profile of that site? Do poor quality sites tend to be less prompt in their data entry, or is there no correlation?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Okay.
I think taking it back even slightly further, a lot of it comes down to actually the resource you have on site.
That's right.
And it's interesting to me, again, I can go in and you talk to the study coordinator, you talk to the investigators on a different basis to the CRA, and you suddenly find that these people are put upon, they're working on 10 studies, they can't get access to the medical information because it's split between various systems.
That's right.
There are some times where it is not possible to enter the data in 5 days because the site has mechanisms that it needs that data for a week or 2 weeks before it releases it. So I think some of it comes down to understanding. There will always be some sites where you will never get it in. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, recruitment of sites that have the resource, or indeed, I was in 2 weeks ago, I was actually in China, and we were visiting 2 sites. One, they were having huge problems with getting data in because of resourcing, because the site had a number of obstructive internal mechanisms, putting it politely anyway, about getting data. The other site was an equally busy site, but in fact the CRO had put in a study coordinator to assist with a number, and that was working beautifully. So again, some of these things, it's actually, it's not just the metrics and things, it's actually fingers on a keyboard.
Yep. But it's the metrics drive the behaviors, so it forces the CRA, the site, the local office to think about a plan for that site, because they know that there is an expectation and they understand the reason for that expectation. So yes, and there will be sites that cannot. I said there's at least 5-7% that isn't doing 5 days. And sometimes we understand and accept that, and sometimes those are just recalcitrant sites that we're having to work on.
But as you say, it's detecting it, it's working, it's thinking and doing something about it.
This again feeds into the next question, which is also on the same broader topic of risk-based monitoring. How do we feed other signals for increased monitoring into the RBM model, which is predominantly data-driven? For example, poor history of drug accountability, staff changes at site, or indeed exceptionally low or no recruitment. If we are, again, in a pure risk-based model and using data as the primary driver for decisions about where and when monitoring should be conducted, how do we factor those other things into that planning?
I think it's probably...
Sure. So I'll take a go at it, but the whole risk-based monitoring approach is certainly new for Takeda. When I say new, we started the effort probably about 12 months ago. And unlike Adrian, we have 2 strategic partners that we work with, and we've decided that our model would be based on the work that our strategic partners had started many years ago. So we wanted to take advantage and the values that they had learned over the years of doing RBM. So our strategic partners have their models that they've been using, and we have now kind of tagged on to that model. So our experience is recent, but what we're finding is there are still scheduled monitoring visits. But the value and what happens at those scheduled monitoring visits, more time in the pharmacy, more time on the reg binder, more time on primary and secondary endpoints. I think the value that people are getting out of the visits, so it's not the early data that's providing the signals on some of these things that people worry about. I think it's the ability for the monitors to now have that additional time on site that they didn't have when they were spending so much time in doing the source review, that's providing the new value there. And although I have no data to prove that is certainly the positive that's coming out of it, that certainly is the hope, and I think that is what we will see.
Good. Adrian.
So this is a tough area as to what are the triggers that effectively identify sites that are struggling. And I'm sure that it's not just one set of triggers. It will be different triggers, well, probably a core set of triggers, and then a different additional set for each study. And we have a set of triggers, and we have a system for adding triggers. I think where the industry is moving, and for those of you who attended the risk-based monitoring session yesterday, there was a lot of talk about the integrated quality risk management plan. And I think that is an essential document we're moving towards, and as an industry we have to, that takes into account the study, and the study team will think about what are you've got your base triggers, and what are the extra things that we need to add in to make sure that we're monitoring this study, these patients, these sites effectively. And I think that's where adding in these other important triggers will jump out at us.
I mentioned earlier that the questions had fallen into sort of a number of quite clearly defined groups, and risk-based monitoring is clearly a very popular and burning topic at the moment. I just have one more question on this, which relates to contracting models. What would the panel feel might be the impact of risk-based monitoring on the contractual models that exist between sponsors and CROs? Because this has been a sort of a topic of conversation in some sidebar discussions over the last couple of days from some of my CRO friends who do have some concerns about how you factor this to be defined, if you like, risk at the beginning of a study. And how do you build that into the contract or even into the proposal when you're at the bidding stage? I don't know if you want to take that one, and Adrian first.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So probably I should, because I know Adrian has functional service provider model where we have a fully outsourced model. So the way that our contracts are built now very much includes, especially in late stage development, risk-based monitoring as one of the innovations provided by our strategic partners. So we very much value the innovations that our strategic partners bring to the table, and RBM is certainly one of those. And by allowing them to use their systems, use their technology, and leverage the experience that they have, which is RBM, that actually adds value within the contract when we work with them, because they can provide certain discounts to us, because this is now part of their innovative model that allows them to be faster and better at what they do. So it's actually a very important part of our contract now.
Adrian.
So this one's quite tough. At a portfolio level, we see our algorithm for monitoring works quite well, and we predict a certain number of monitors. When we look at the individual studies, we're seeing increasingly that the algorithm doesn't work very well. And I hypothesize that's because of the risk-based monitoring, that a study may be going through may need more monitoring. The triggers have fired and we're seeing more activities. And in another study, the triggers aren't firing and it needs less monitoring activity. But it sort of washes out on a portfolio basis, which works out very well for us in our model, which is an FSP model. And I see some of our FSP partners here in the audience, in that we work with one partner per country, and we request a certain number of monitoring CTA resources on the country level, and we can flexibly move those across our portfolio in that country. So I don't have the problem of moving between two different providers. On the portfolio level, those resources sort of wash out across the country. So it makes it a very convenient, easy model to use and enables us to use the resources most flexibly within the country and across sites and studies.
Do you think that might drive the industry more in the direction of FSP?
I think the FSP works for certain size companies. I think that, again, my view, my opinion on this is that small companies probably are better off with a full service organization because they don't have to build some of those capabilities. For the medium to large size, you can go with the FSP or a full service if you deal with the issue of standardization. And to my mind, the choice for the medium and large companies comes down to how are you going to standardize the way that you collect, store, manage your studies and data. And in the FSP model that we use, we standardize on the Amgen systems and processes, not because they're better than anybody else's. In fact, I'd be willing to move on to another set of systems, another platform, if one was available and easily and commonly used. So if you do the Pfizer type model, where they use a number of providers, they aggregate the data in the clinical aggregation layer, and that's another way of achieving standardization. One other method for standardization is the Merck Serono model, where they've chosen one provider, Quintiles, and use all of their systems and processes and use a sort of full service model with them. So to my mind, standardization is a key factor. How are you going to deal with that, and what works for your company's size and time in its development portfolio?
Interesting, very interesting. I think at this point we've probably kicked the RBN topic around for probably long enough this morning. There should hopefully be some time at the end of this for a few short questions in case there's any burning topics that you forgot to stick on the board yesterday, or you've just thought of something new, which you can post to the panel. Or of course, I'm sure they'll be wandering around for the rest of the day if you want to grab them individually. I think now maybe a subtle change of subject. One of the questions that came up here, maybe this is one for you, Geoff. With the ongoing developments of risk-based monitoring and eTMF, for example, how do we better prepare our studies for a successful submission?
Oh, gosh, okay.
Is that what you want to take?
Yes, it depends how you define successful submission, and from the QA aspect, I would say one that's passed its regulatory inspection and actually got part of an approved package, let's put it that way. I think the most important thing is really remembering why we do studies, and we can talk about benefit to patients and healthcare and so on, but we're in a commercial world. We have to get a study that passes scrutiny and is successful. Okay, that's the basic name of the game. Let's take it back to its crudest form. So what do we need to do that? Well, what we need, obviously, is to start thinking about this at the earliest possible stage. We as a QA department get called in, obviously, when we hear from regulatory inspectors, but we do actually like to be involved from a much, much earlier stage and to see that study teams have got a inspection preparedness, regulatory preparedness strategy in place from really the earliest possible point. And we see, interestingly, within our company, we have two therapeutic groups primarily. One that have had some grief from regulatory inspectors who now have, bless them, moved towards beginning inspection preparedness activities at a much earlier stage. And they're almost beginning at the point where you've recruited your last patient into the study. Ergo, you can see where we're talking about pain points. Well, it's appropriate to say, where are your pain points? Where are your patients? Where are your countries? Where are your problems that you're seeing because of either the monitoring visits or the data metrics that you're seeing? And they will start to do preparedness visits as super monitoring visits, visits biased around assessing data robustness as much as data accuracy, so that you can work towards getting things sorted out at the point that the database lock, and you don't have long these days. That's the big change. We're now seeing database lock happening 4 weeks after the last patient in, clinical study report 3 months after that. In years gone by, there was a year before, between those points. We're now down to 3 months, which means that you have to keep on top of things right the way through. As I said, the other therapeutic group that we have tend to put round a sort of internal press release saying, we've locked the database 3 months early, and you think, oh Christ, we ought to start thinking about inspections, because we know that, for instance, one country, 50% of the patients come out of this obscure country, and you put that into the regulators and they're going to go, ugh, let's check that, please. So what we've been doing is working with the teams to kind of develop thought processes that say, you do your analysis, where's the patients, where's the risk, what are the key efficacy data, is it a date of death, is that robust, can it be proven? And going back to the point about CRAs just checking the first bit of paper, a scribbled note of a telephone conversation to say somebody rang in and said patient had died is really not good enough. You're actually looking at something which does really verify that key efficacy data. So EDC, hopefully your data gets in more quickly and you can check it more early or earlier, English correctly. The ETMF world is a constant battle for us as a QA group. Virtually all of our audits, one of the findings is that the ETMF was not kept up to date. We use the ETMF actively as a resource. We have our own ETMF system, and we have our CRO partners put documents into that on an ongoing basis, or at least that's what they're meant to do. We get excuses like we were told, too busy setting sites up for you and initiating the sites and things, but please could you put the documents in to prove you've done it? Question all the time. So, but what it should mean is that the ETMF is visible on the desktop. The more sophisticated systems give you metrics, give you views. You can check the flow of documents into it. So to some extent, the new systems should actually assist in the process of preparation in avoiding the huge amount of resource that goes into checking the TMF in the last few weeks of the study and finding that the document from 2 years ago is missing, and you'll never find it, frankly. Or the resource to find that document is huge, and you've got 5 or 6 members of your internal team doing nothing but sitting in front of a computer and making calls and emails and things. That's the thing to avoid. So, if you can do, the new system should allow you to do that, but again, you've got to ally it with a different thought mechanism. You've still got to, we talked about risk-based monitoring. It's risk-based management of the study, and once you get to a certain point in the study, and I would say the last patient in is the point to do it, or if you see that one country is going ahead or an investigator site is recruiting, the clinical team are wonderfully happy they've got more patients. And we in the QA department are sitting here thinking, you're just storing up trouble for yourself. It's a very different viewpoint. I like to say we're probably correct more of the time, but unfortunately. So the new system should allow you to begin to make that subtle change in your planning so that the entire close down process is smoother, the entire preparation for the inevitable regulatory inspections, be they FDA, and I have around 10 with the FDA week after next, and we put a lot of time and effort into that. We put less time and effort into the current round perhaps than we have in the past, so it maybe shows that things are getting better on that basis. So that's really, I think, what I have to say. Start thinking about that end game.
Absolutely.
Much earlier.
Gentlemen, thoughts, comments?
I would completely agree. I mean, I see the total value in RBM being, the earlier review of data, the earlier entry of data, the ability for our medical team and pharmacy teams to do some early review of trends in the data, the ability to early on do potential audits led to by risk factors within our systems and our database, which point us to which are the sites that we should be on from day one. Because the earlier approach to, repairing sites that might need some more support, just the earlier review of the data is so critical to not waiting till the very end. And I think that should lead to what would be a successful submission.
So just a couple of things to add to the good points already made. The lack of metrics in the TMF system allowing you to understand whether it's up to date or not. I just, in terms of our systems, that's a problem. In terms of giving real-time feedback to the teams or the team leader, you have a problem. These sites aren't up to date. Right. So that's one area. The second one has been the sort of culture shock and the change with the MHRA demanding to be able to go in and have hands-on access to the TMF. And for us, it's not one system, it's multiple systems. And we've previously had them come in, or other regulatory authorities, and say, we want this document. And behind the scenes, people go into various systems.
Like hell.
there's a team that gets all that stuff ready and delivers it to the inspectors. They're now saying, no, that's not how it's going to work. We want to have the terminal in front of us, and we want to be able to pull up whatever data we want. And since it's in multiple systems, that's quite complex for us. So we're having to take a very good look at that.
I mean, the MHRA are quite good at it. We had them last September, came in to us, and exactly that. We had to, the inspection room, we have pictures of the inspection room, which basically is 2 computer terminals, compared with the old piles of files all over the room. I would say that, interestingly for us, we've sort of been evolving our eTMF system. So we've gone from a model which replicated a paper file, which frankly was useless because you can flick through a paper file and find what you want. You can't do it electronically. Right. To a system which is much more delineated and structured, which causes a little bit of difficulty in scratching heads to think exactly which section, because there's got to have a little more detail about section 11.4.1b that it's got to go in. On the other hand, there's a benefit at the end of the day of transparency within the eTMF system, and the system we use is a commercial system, which, as I said, it is developing metrics. It is going to be able to provide you with that document flow. It provides searching capabilities, so you can sort of just say, well, show us the ethics approvals across in France or something, or maybe actually in China, where there's lots of ethics approvals in the old-fashioned system, and you can do that actually quite quickly and quite readily. The battle's actually training either the CRO or our internal team to use those metrics, to do those spot checks, to make sure that things are up to date, and to do it at appropriate points. So you have a protocol amendment. Well, a month after that's been released on an unsuspecting world, go into the eTMF, see how the progress is doing, double check that things are happening. It's not rocket science to say you've got a pain point in your study, check it out, and you can do that now.
So this is a painful stimulus that we're getting,
Absolutely.
but it's a really important one,
Yeah.
and it will improve the quality of our work, and we will be inspection ready as we go along.
Yeah,
So I think
I mean, frankly, I'm just waiting for the FDA to do exactly the same
Yes.
thing and just persuade, as a Brit, I can say this, I suppose, our colleagues in the US to wake up to the fact that, you know, we're in a different world now, and keeping things up to date is important, because you can no longer work on the old FDA model of just get me a copy of the document.
Right.
Yeah. Much talk of data and obviously timely decision and informed decision making. There's maybe a rule here that very shortest questions sometimes require the longest answers, and I'm conscious of the time. A very open question came up. What makes a good performing site? Being that a bad performing site tends to be the root of most of our problems, how do we define a good performing site?
For me, one without any audit findings, I suppose.
Okay.
But crudely, one you can work with, I think, is you know, that, and you can see why there weren't any audit findings. That probably is a short explanation as I can make it.
Do you have a view on this? I mean, it's pretty, they're the fundamental building blocks, effectively, of what we do. So,
I suppose I'd turn it around as what are the predictive factors that will help us know which site is going to be a good performing site, and I'd go broader than just quality, which is a fundamental underpinning, but performance in terms of recruitment, etc.
Right.
And we've tried to analyze our data every which way. We've had a statistician poring over it, and there are seemingly no predictive factors. It's not how much we pay a site, it's not the geography, it's often, in fact, surprisingly not related to what they've done previously. Because what you find is that staff turnover, particularly coordinators at a site, impact the productivity of a site. You have a site that did a great job last study and this time does really badly, either because change of staff or maybe a competing study. So I hate to say this, but I don't know what the predictive features of a site. We all know gut feel, but to be honest, at a sort of industry level, we can't say, well, we've got to rely on gut feel for, we have 800 plus CRAs, so we have to rely on the gut feel of 800 CRAs. Some of them are going to be right. But in terms of a methodology,
it's funny because somebody said to me yesterday, just in a passing conversation, a really good CRA can smell fraud. And I mean, it kind of alludes to this in a sense that there's a lot of instinct in here, in a sense, that then it's born from very experienced people.
Right.
So, Patrick.
My guess is the question is coming from the value that any company, sponsoring company, is going to get from the predictability of picking upfront during your feasibility, a set number of all good sites, right? So if we all get really good at that magic value of if we need 25 sites, can we pick 25 good sites? And if that predictor and if that algorithm really existed, then there should be no reason why our study shouldn't be on time, on budget, right? But it's a bit magic, and I agree with Adrian that there are times where one site does very well for us, and then in the next trial, they don't do as well, for the reasons he mentioned, competing studies or whatever. I doubt that it's the simple answer of, a good site to us is one that obviously is focused on our trial, does really well with enrollment, and is focused on the quality of the data that they're providing to us, and is responsive to queries. That would be the definition of a good site. But what I think the person really meant by that pain point is if we could figure out up front if that site was going to be a good site for us, then it would be easy from an operations perspective to run our trials. And it is difficult.
So this is establishing the elusive link between feasibility and actually what happens.
Right.
We have our wish list, which is rarely what actually happens in once we start the study.
Yeah, I mean, I think we look at audit metrics, obviously, from fairly frequently, actually. And some interesting things come out. I mean, one of our selection criteria for when we're choosing places to go is we will look at geographic distribution. So you will find within the geography of Europe, for instance, that, say, the Baltic states are quite good at neuroscience studies. They don't recruit huge numbers of patients because there's actually populations are comparatively small. But they recruit moderately well, the quality is good. We never really have a lot to say in audits, so why do we need to go there? So in that sense, there's a self-selecting area. Within oncology, we see increasingly that the emergence of more professional sites in particularly France, in Germany, and in Italy, which is surprising because certainly two of those three have always had a bit of a reputation of being a bit sort of gung-ho. But that's no longer the case, actually, when you look at what we're doing. And we find that going to those sites, it's not perfect, but they are better, considerably better because of the nature of the organization of those sites and the focus on research that they've got. You know, they've decided it's a good area to be in, and they've got the physicians, they've got the keenness, there's a certain amount of Latin flair, if you like, in some of that they're interested in learning, and it's important to them compared with the UK, where basically research is a bit of a nuisance to many physicians. Yes, there are very good sites in the UK, but there's also an awful lot that there aren't. So, you know, when you're looking about what makes a good site, sometimes, you know, it's geographical factors and socioeconomic factors as much as the individual site itself.
Interesting. I am conscious of the time. I'm going to be very sort of traditionally Northern European and try and finish to the second. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. I'm going to be slightly ambitious and just field one more question to the panel. So if we could try and maybe cover this quickly with some short answers, because it was quite an interesting one. As an industry, should we consult with patient representatives during the study design phase? And if so, how? And what should we be looking to achieve? I don't know,
Go ahead.
So,
Go for it.
So the easy and quick answer is absolutely. I think there's tremendous value in reaching out to patients in some way. I don't think the methodology is completely down. I had mentioned to someone yesterday, there's a group in the States called Patients Like Me, which actually works with sponsoring companies on reaching out to patients and you know, hearing value during the protocol development stage. We have certainly spoken with advocacy groups in the past, but the quick and easy answer that you asked for is yes, I believe there's tremendous value there, and I think over time we will get better at that, because I think in the long run it's going to benefit all of us.
Again, the answer is a resounding yes. I'd qualify it with, we need to actually see what value this brings. I enjoyed Jack Whelan's talk yesterday tremendously. But Patients Like Me, other organizations, we'll see over the coming years how much impact that has on the protocol, the doability of the protocol, and so we'll see how, you know, does it delay protocol development? Does it produce value? I think it, intuitively, you think this is going to be a good idea, but we've got to prove this. Again, it shouldn't be just, well, gut feel, I think it's okay.
It's interesting that the one key stakeholder group in everything we do is the patient who either signs or doesn't sign the informed consent. And it's strange that very often, you know, it's very late in the process that we actually put that document in front of them. So I would agree with your previous comments.
It's far too late again. That's, you know, one of our, we just copy it from one audit report to the next in some ways. But yes, I mean, the consent process itself is pretty deeply flawed in many places when you really have the opportunity to dig into the process in terms of the sites really understanding what's properly meant by time to consider, to discuss and so on. It's still, and we do very silly things. I mean, again, I think yesterday somebody talked about 20-page consent document. That's actually quite a short one. And when you find, again, situations where you take The consent document, we do tend to take a global document, which unfortunately tends to be biased around what the US legal department wants, which is not really suitable for Europe and is most definitely not suitable when you take it into Asia. And you see these translated into Chinese. They grow 50% when you do that. And really, come on, chaps, this is not on. And that, from our perspective, we really need to be working hard. There's plenty of time to develop different regional consent documents, better styles for consent document, which again would help. And, if we're talking to patient advocacy groups, years ago, I think it was Novartis who, in the UK, went out to a sort of public relations company and actually redesigned their consent form along a magazine article, which actually was very sensible to do. Again, I think talk to the patients, get something that they want.
It's nice to finish on a point where we have a very clear consensus. We've got about 4 minutes. I don't know if anybody in this very large gathering is brave enough to grab a microphone and pose a question, but now is your chance before we wrap things up. So I don't know if there's any questions for the panel here in the room this morning.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that. I've really enjoyed the discussion. Nick Hodges from Pfizer. Just one comment, and I think, David, you asked a question about the timeliness of data entry to see if there was any correlation. We have actually found, looking at the data, that there is a correlation, a bit of a predictor of poor site health when you have poor timeliness of data entry, and then an increased likelihood of a critical finding, for instance. One other comment, maybe just about what makes a good site. One thing, I guess, from when I go back to being a CRA, I always used to find was that a site that actually gives their essential documents back quickly seems to be keen, and then tends to be a better site in terms of quality, because their attention to detail and then recruitment. So no questions, just a comment.
Thank you.
Just say thanks, Nick. Pfizer was our role model when we were looking to speed up. It was the example I used to the organization to say, well, it can be done. So that was great. And I have seen that data, but I've never seen it repeated. And certainly in our data, we did a huge multifactorial analysis of everything we could think of in terms of aspects of the trial and the site. And we weren't able to repeat that predictability of return of reg docs and predicting the speed of recruitment, but it may be one.
I was going to say, data entry is one thing. The other thing that strikes me actually very often is resolution of data queries. The timeliness of that is often far worse than the speed of entry. And resolution of follow-up queries from SAEs and things from the pharmacovigilance group is often appalling. Yep. So it's not just the initial data entry you've got to take into consideration.
Great. Thanks for the comment. So it is about 10 seconds to go. So I shall wind things up here. I'd just like you to join me in thanking our expert panel this morning. And hopefully the discussion has either sort of alleviated some of those pain points, or maybe made some of them go away for some of you this morning. So thank you for coming along. Thanks for your contributions. Thanks for staying awake. I know it's been a tough week so far. So and again, thanks to the panel. So I'd like to.